To start the live, we had a big problem here right off the bat, huh? Let's see what we're going to do here. Videos. Videos. Another. I'll have to generate another one. It's bad if you want to. It went wrong and I'm going to start doing the live again because there was a problem with the previous live, so I'm doing a new live now. Those who are watching me here on Instagram can already see that I'm rushing to do the live again, and I'm going to send it to you. Let's start the live. We're going to start the live stream now. We're fixing things, and when there was a problem, we went off the air a little while ago. There was a problem and we had to fix the live stream at this moment, and we're going to start the live stream now. I'm just going to fix something else here because the live stream isn't working. Over the internet. It doesn't work on YouTube. Today's live stream isn't working on YouTube, so we're going to broadcast it here. It's going to be kind of offline, right? It didn't work on YouTube. It's not letting you in. It's giving an error. So today's live stream we're going to do here on Instagram. And on the cell phone, and then I'll upload it to YouTube, okay? So right now we're doing today's live on the cell phone and on Instagram. Today's live, the name of it, we're in Aventura, May 21st, 2025. The title of the live is God Dwells Among Us Without Being One of Us. That's the idea of today's live. So God dwells among us without being one of us. What does this context have to do with it? Why am I saying that God dwells among us? The idea that we are talking about is the idea of a being. God as a being who lives among us. God is the divinity that we have. The being lives among us without being one of us. This is very interesting. There is a very cool concept of Tupa, the concept of Tupa, which he says the following: Tupa, he is among the trees, he is not one of the trees, he is among the trees, being then a type of divinity, a permanence, a presence. This presence allows things to flow. If it were in the Jayana Omani culture, we would speak a little differently. We would say Omama. Whole. It's that whole thing. So it's a set of things. This Omama would also be the Neuropia, a living thing flowing there. And today we talk about being in this idea of God living among us without being one of us. This is important. Being as divinity, being as where you come from, where you appear. This is being. Being is a divinity that breathes silently among the selves. You have a lot of selves, and today we are going to try to address this lot of selves. What is this lot of selves? What is the purpose of a self? And with today's definition, we are going to get to what a self is for. What is the activity of a self? And it is not difficult to understand this. The self, it comes to a doing. Each self is a kind of avatar. Each self is a metabolic avatar for a doing, an existential feeling, a brain formation. It is a self. It is a self, a brain formation. The self, I can also say that it is the following. The self, it has a connection with the body, with the feelings it has, with the emotional parts. So the self, it's a pei and the tupe. Remember when I said that the tupe, I told you that the tupe are brain images. And these brain images, the tupe, would be like spirits, like semantic memories, right? It relates one thing to another, the smell, the essence. Okay, but when these memories, when these ideas, when these images have a connection with our emotions, they are called pei and the tupe. When these images, when these is a soul. The self is a soul. You have several selves, and the being lives among us. Who are we? Ourselves. So I'm really only talking about you, okay? Only about me. So this being is the being that emanates, the living being, the being essence, the being presence. It lives among all ourselves. Why are you going to talk about all of ourselves? And what is the self for? The self serves to do something. Every time you do something, you recruit a self automatically. Sure, man, you were born, you learned, you know how things are, but you recruit a self. I'll give you an example that's perhaps easy to understand. And let's suppose you have a bicycle and you know how to ride a bicycle quite well, and you know how to do it so well that when you go down a path that is suddenly in the woods or has a bit of wood, you inflate the bicycle tire a little more flat. And if you go on asphalt, you inflate the bicycle tire very well, very hard, asphalt without many holes, without anything, inflate the tire. If you go somewhere that has a lot of sand, I inflate the tire a little more because that makes it easier for you to flow along that path. So inflating the bicycle tire is good. The self, and each one you use, it puts a little more or less air in your lungs. The self controls your breathing to do it right. It doesn't always know how. There are some selves that get lost, especially when you're learning, right? Sometimes I went to a Pilates class and there was a time when the teacher said, breathe, because the self, when it's trying to learn, holds its breath. The breath becomes very short and it tries to make the prefrontal region feed on oxygen. More, it opens the veins of the prefrontal arteries to get more oxygen into this prefrontal part, so you have a little more understanding of things. Dude, but it's a Pilates class. You also need to oxygenate your whole body, otherwise you'll fall, you'll get dizzy, right? So did you notice? The self, it calibrates the lung part. The self, it gives a body posture and the amount of air in your lungs. So for example, I can have a self that is like this, very puffed out. Look, I puffed out my rib cage, okay? And my breathing, I'm going to keep it puffed out. I'm breathing, but my breathing is a little more abdominal. This self perhaps is a posture that I have to have in my business, or it gives a sense of self-affirmation. So this self, it will shape, it will inflate the bicycle tire or fill your lungs with a certain pressure, with a certain amount of air. And it will maintain your metabolism to maintain this element, this self. This existential feeling. But where does this self come from? It comes from the being, the human being, of course. So let's go. God dwells among us without being any of us. God the being dwells among ourselves without being any of them. But he dwells among them. And here's a great trick. Before I go a little deeper into other areas, the great trick is this. When you have a self that knows and you have another self that also knows, and sometimes they are antagonistic, they are knowledge that does not match. Personally, even within yourself, okay? But if you're going to talk to another person and they have a self, their self 15, their self 20, and you're going to talk to yourself 32, yourself 15, and you have an idea 2 and the other has an idea 1, we have, and neither of us wants to lie or surpass the other, neither wants to cheat, but I'm talking about 2 and the other is talking about 1. We both have to negotiate, we have to talk, we have to engage in diplomacy so that I don't impose this 2 on you and you don't impose this 1 on me. The truth for both of us is between the 2 of us, okay? Go back there. God lives between us without being either of us. I'm not right with both of us and you're not right with 1. But in the middle of us there is something right, because it's in the middle of us that the being is. Reason is kind of in the middle of things. It's not in an individual, and today's live is strongly focused on that. Every time there is an I, it will express itself, and it will express itself with great confidence. But look, the I is not the being. The I is not the truth. It is not God. The I is simply an expression for a doing. Let's go. So it's a metabolic avatar. It's a feeling, the self. And he comes to do, not to remember. And now I'm going to talk to you about something that I went through. I lost my father a year ago, a little bit, and so on. But sometimes some concepts and things come up. Last night I felt a deep pain of loss, right? And I tried to understand what this is like, where this pain is occurring, what this pain is, and I had a little more understanding of it. In the next live I might explain it a little better, but today I'm going to explain something else. For example, I arrive in an environment, which is this environment here, for example, okay? And in this environment, there are these images, there are these things, and there are these spaces, and suddenly I lived here with another person, a loved one, my father, mother, or wife, or son, okay? In this environment here. So every time I arrived in this environment, there is something that is the aftermath I told you, which is the extended perception itself, the extended mind that we have. The Damasian concept is proprioception, your body position in space, and your muscular tensions, and interoception. Which is the deep feeling which also comes along with your feelings. And the expanded perception itself involves this environment and the living beings that inhabit this environment. So I have a self that survives for this environment. I will call this self 22. Self 22 is in this environment and is relating to some living people in this environment. So this self has an essence of being doing. Supporting this other living being in front of me by my side and this environment where this self perceives itself, okay? The living being that was with me, that lived with me for 20, 30, 40, 60 years, was gone. And the atmosphere continues. And when I arrive at the environment, and a self comes strong, and it comes to do things that please or that have a reciprocity of doing and receiving the return of what it does from a living being that no longer exists. Calm down. This self of doing is not doing more for this living being because the living being no longer exists, so he can be a self that he will do more in you, which is mourning. So you arrive in an environment of things, of images that remind you of the deceased person, and you have a self that comes to do something and receive the return. Yes, but there is no return. The living being is no longer here. There is only an environment that has a memory of this living being. That is me. This is me. And this is the pain of mourning. It's where you have a self to do something that doesn't need to be done. It's an empty self at this moment. So we have to give new meaning to this self. If I'm in the same environment as this loving being who was with me, or who I had a certain attachment to for a long time, and the being is no longer there, I have to make this self that appears in me, that did things, have to become a memory now. This soul that was a self, this feeling that was a self of doing and receiving the return of what it does, has to become simply a memory, a spirit, an essence. Return to being simply the to-be, return to being a semantic memory, not an episode, return to being a spirit and no longer a soul of doing, but a spirit of remembering. And there is nothing else to do because the loved one is no longer here. Simple. We arrive at the environment and the self of doing appears for that, and then comes the pain. In my case, I am more or less here. The pain that gives a sensation, a certain crying over this self that sometimes wants to do for the presence of the Father that no longer has the presence of the Father. So it is a self that comes. I no longer have a function, so I have to break it and stop being the essence, stop being a memory without touching the emotions too much, but touching, But there is no doing, so it is touching the emotions, remembering the good things that happened with this loved one who now no longer exists. And then you try to get through this mourning, but it will not give that empty self that comes to a doing. Why? The self comes from this interaction with the environment where you are, which is expanded proprioception, okay? Let's go. In the next live, I might explain a little more about this, which has its complexities, okay? The being is a divinity. It breathes in silence between yourselves. Of course, because every time you realize that you are a self for a doing, and the being is the living, peaceful being, sometimes you sleep, sometimes you wake up. The body is the being, so this being, this divinity that you are, and you realize this divinity between oneself and another. This divinity is a caring divinity. It is not controlling because it is a being. Listen deeply to the body and the environment. It is the being. As the body and the environment, it is the being. And then it allows the self to emanate into that body and into that environment. Cares without demanding, act without naming things. It circulates in everything without fixing itself on anything. It is the being. This is the being. This is the being. This is the God that opens among us without being any of us. This God in the sense, not a God outside of you, in the sense of a God that allows your body to have perception, that your body processes to emanate the consciousness of a self that does. Or of spirits or ideas that do not do, but which are thoughts that help to do, okay? And then what happens? What is important? God dwells among us and will never be one of ourselves. When one of your selves or one of your metabolic processes of doing something or one of your existential feelings that does something, early in the morning, 8 a.m., 7 a.m., runs, rides a bike, does a job, I don't know, anything you do you understand? That you do it with consciousness, your consciousnesses, the different consciousnesses that you have during the day or even in your dreams, okay? These consciousnesses are a self, which I call me, okay, this entire metabolism. When this self thinks it is the being, when this self he thinks he is God. And that's the problem. This is a very serious problem because, look, let's go back to the self as a neurobiological and postural adjustment. This self, you see, is always there to fulfill a role. It changes your breathing, it modulates your muscle and visceral tone, okay? It directs selective attention. It's your self-doing, okay? It accesses the memories and beliefs that make sense for this doing. So the self selects the memory, the belief, controls your breathing, controls your tension, controls your muscles, controls your, right, this very perception in this expanded space where you perceive this being. But when this self tries to put itself in the position of the being God, this self, if you think God and the body and the society where this self is, you get sick. The body of this self and the society that surrounds it. Why? Why? This self will naturally impede the natural alternation of states of consciousness. It will fixate on one consciousness and will not allow other possibilities of consciousness to appear in you, in your body. Because the self comes and dominates and does not allow alternation of consciousness, of natural states of consciousness. It crystallizes postural and visceral tensions in function of something permanent, having to be the same always. It is a return to being what it was yesterday. It is the tension on the same tension. So it is an I that blocks the possibility of a different being, of the possibilities of seeing the new world that is born each day. No, you will always see the old world and the old world because you are in this being locked on top of an I that has kidnapped a being. The being is free. It is not an I, and the being lives between one I and another. You know, when you're riding a bike, you stop and go take a shower. Look, you stopped, you changed your I. Then the being appears, then the essence appears, then the vitality of the human being appears. Okay. If I get stuck in the self, I generate physical, emotional, and spiritual illnesses. I govern as if it were the only way to see the world. I have the truth, okay? I'm a kind of authoritarian, patriarchal, colonizing, utilitarian guy, if you understand. Because my way of seeing is what is right. I'm stuck in being, I've kidnapped being. It has a religious symbolism. I came from the Christian world, now I am secular, but also of Christianity. And there they say the following, that sometimes from the great paradise at the beginning of the universe and such, some selves or angels, some of them tried to be God. And that is what we are talking about, a self that tries to be the being. Inside you there is also a lot of me that wants to be the being, wants to be the owner of your life. Don't let it. You have to control yourselves and each one of them. Argue with others and argue with others from other people, but don't take a stand on the truth and don't want to impose this truth on others, but don't give up your perception of the truth either. You will talk and discuss, talk and dialogue with others, and you will know that the right thing is between this one and that one, as long as the two are not in a world of misinformation. That the group that is in this process now against the coup, something similar in this world, which they call the sewer gang, the rabble, the misinformation, just to only misinformation. Whoever is misinformed, there is no point in comparing their self with yourself, because then the person is in a world of misinformation. There is no point. Let's suppose that both of you have proof, facts, photos and facts, right? Photos and facts, and now versions about photos and facts, and I have one idea and you have another idea, and suddenly the right idea is the idea in the middle. You see, it's neither mine nor yours, but both ideas based on facts and photos and recorded videos and audio and concrete reality. So that's what I wanted to leave with you today, that God dwells among us without being any of us. The self, two self, three self, four self that you have. When you exchange one self for another, one doing for another doing, there is the being, the pure presence that permeates all of this. But the being will not fixate on any self. Naturally, the being will respect, but a self that thinks it is wise can pretend to be God. And then, I am the Messiah, I am the truth, I will free these people. That is satanic, that is satanic. Because from the moment you pretend to be God, you have lost the reason for being. Because the truth is among us. It is not in any of us. Guys, that's what I wanted to leave you with this Wednesday. See you next Wednesday.